Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on week 4 of Coastal Weekly Live Zooms. It's a bit discombobulated this morning. I've got to join us from out here in Chilliwack, so I'm virtual. Everyone else, thanks for making it in. And we're going to be going through a live edit session of editing some drone photos. So today's going to be less about instruction and more about practical application. What we're going to do is we're going to screen share Adobe Lightroom. We're going to go through a couple different photos, different scenes, and just kind of talk our way through it and figure out the best way to edit them. First off is going to be just a walkthrough of Adobe Lightroom. So Finn, were you able to grab the photos?
Yes, I can do it.
Yeah, so why don't you go through one first and then we'll shift and then I'll hop on and do one afterwards. So
okay, here we are in Adobe Lightroom. I've already imported all of the photos. So when you import photos into Lightroom, they are just kind of all in a group. You can see here it's like I have like a bunch of folders here. So then you find that in the library and you click develop. So I need to select a photo and then click develop. So maybe I'll just start with this one, which is one of Ian's car photos, and then here's that photo. Is that a baby? That is a baby. Very good. Then this is kind of the main screen you get. I'm going to get rid of the navigator and the navigator, so I get more. And then on the on the right hand side here, I'm going to get all of my things that I can affect in this photo. So this is what you'll get, and it's pretty daunting. As you can see, there's like a lot of different things that you can do, but you can actually keep it fairly simple in Lightroom. One of the things that you can do is you can get the histogram, and you can actually just start clicking and dragging on the histogram to change the histogram. I don't generally do that. I normally actually use the actual sliders. Sorry,
So as Finn's getting set up, I'll kind of give you a quick walk around of what Adobe Lightroom is. So it used to be that basically all your photos would be edited in Adobe Photoshop, which was a photo editing, creation, 2D production software suite. In the mid 2000s, Adobe came out with Adobe Lightroom, which is a photo specific editing program. You, in theory, don't need any other software other than Adobe Lightroom in order to both edit, store, and finalize your photos. So real quick overview, Adobe Lightroom there's two major versions. There's Classic and then there's Adobe Cloud version. Right now we're using Classic, and Classic is meant to be used on a computer, so either Mac or PC, and you can license it from Adobe for $10 a month. And it comes with Adobe Photoshop as well for more creative editing. Lightroom is meant initially to catalog all your photos so you can sort them by location, date, time, and whatever metadata that maybe your photos have. You could even sort them by the camera type, or you can create tags. There's a massive library catalog module that you can have one per customer. You can have one per month, year, whatever you want. You can basically create these little database files, and then those databases are attached to wherever your original full-size photos are. Important thing to remember with Adobe Lightroom is it's a non-destructive editor. So whatever you do in Lightroom is stored in a Lightroom database file, not against the actual original photo. What Finn's going to be doing here, all the post-editing, the color, cropping, etc., that's all going to be done to basically, it's called a sidecar or an XMP file. Imagine it's a recipe for finishing the photo. So we've got the original ingredients being the DNG or the raw file coming out of the drone, and then we use Lightroom to then tell the software how to finish the file. And then when we're done all of this, we then export that file as a JPEG or a PNG or some other permanently finished file. So we don't do anything permanent until we export the photo. So everything you do in Lightroom is reversible. There's a high level of safety. So that's the high level of what Lightroom does. Now in this interface he's in right now is called the develop interface. And this is the Lightroom. This is where you do the majority of your work that you're going to be doing for editing photos. So across the top, you've got the navigator, all the different panels you can see, like library, develop, map, book, slideshow. Those are all the different modules of Lightroom. And then the bottom, you've got your film strip, and then there's different panels all over the screen. So on the left side, there's an arrow that he hit. That's your navigator and your library. And then also you've got different presets for posting. In this case, because we're in the develop room, if he hovers over any of these, it's going to quickly change the edit or the style of the photo because he's got preset recipes that are made. You can see how the color dramatically changes. On the right side are the adjusters for everything from basic exposure compensation all the way to calibrated lens adjustments, doing different things with grading, fancy effects in there as well. And so you've got a whole bunch of different panels on the right side. Those are the actual fine adjustments. And then like we talked about last week and the week before, the histogram up across the top, that's going to give you the general kind of exposure information for the photo, because first and foremost, Lightroom is kind of like an exposure adjustment tool, and then it goes into more detailed stuff like you can do spot proofing for print, or you can do correction. So from there, go ahead, Finn. Why don't you take your
Sure.
approach you do
Yeah.
to finish this photo?
Yeah, so the first thing I'm looking at when I'm looking at a photo is I'm just kind of looking at the composition first. So I don't like how the
Sorry, just to
roof.
jump in, make sure you're on. There's two versions in here, and one of them seems to be out of focus, and the one was slightly better.
Okay, let me see. Oh
Just
yeah, this one
punch
looks
in
a
on
little.
it and see if it's which one's sharper.
They're both kind of soft, but
Yeah, there might have been some movement.
yeah. I think this one is technically sharper. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at the crop. I don't like how the roof of the house. It's just peeking in from the side like that doesn't look very good. Plus, it's not straight, so it's kind of bugging me. So I'm going to hit R. I hit my R key on my keyboard, and that brings up just the ability to crop. As you can see, I've got the aspect ratio locked to original. If I were to unlock this, I can just select any aspect ratio I want. But I don't really want to do that. I just want to keep it to the original. And I'm just going to pull in from the side a little bit until the roof is not there anymore. And then I'll hit R again. And that's the crop. Now, as Ian was saying, this is non-destructive. So if I hit R again, I could actually, if I wanted to zoom back out, I could do that. Oh, and I didn't even notice that there's a foot in the side here. So I'm going to pull it on from that side too. Get rid of the foot. Just clean up the image a little bit.
So one thing I'll point out, this was shot with, I believe, a Mavic Mini 1, so that's why it's a little soft. Go back to your crop ratio settings. In here, you've got crop and straighten, so you can see there's an overlay grid of the rule of thirds. So you've got those three. And then, like Finn said, it's locked to the aspect. So the important thing to remember with the Mavic 3 is it's a square sensor or a 4x3 sensor camera. So it's not the same aspect ratio as a normal film camera. So what I would actually recommend is if you go into your aspect ratio and set it to 3x2 or 2x3/4x6. So if you go to 2x3/4x6.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
That is a standard aspect ratio for a digital camera like a Canon 5D or something like that. So now you've got more of a traditional or typical print. And then you can certainly, of course, this photo for some reasons is either blurry or out of focus, but you now have the ability to punch in a little bit more. It's supposed to be a 20 megapixel photo, but something's weird going on with our Google Drive today. So,
and then the other thing I want to look for, see if there's anything weird. There's a spot here and a spot here. I'm just going to hit healing, and I'm going to try and, I want to do a spot. You used to be able to do it as a circle.
Yeah, so if you change your size.
They've changed it slightly, but I will press on. So then it's going to find another piece of terrain that looks close enough and heal the spot. And I'm going to do it there too. And now those spots are gone. A little bit cleaner. I would also try and get these spots out, but because they're so close to the lines, it's not going to look great. So I'm just going to leave those for now. And then now I'm going to come into the right side here and start messing with stuff. So the first thing I'm noticing here is this box is like pretty white, whatever this is. So I'm just going to pull the highlights down a little bit and see if that helps. Doesn't really. I am going to leave them a little bit further down, but going to be like that. A lot of people have like styles that they prefer. For me, I like my photos to be a little bit darker and a little bit like with more texture and grit is what normally people like. So you'll find, and if you go to my Instagram, you'll see this. A lot of my photos look like kind of gritty, almost as if I'm not very good. And then I'm going to look at the shadows here. So Ian's car is like a forest green, and it's looking a little bit with the shadows at 0, it's looking a little bit black. I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit to see if I can pull some of the green out of that, and it helps a little bit. White, same thing. I just kind of, there's like technical ways of doing this. You can do it like in a very technical way. I just twiddle the sliders until I like it. And
I feel like that's what I was doing earlier.
Yeah, and that's kind of the noob way of doing things. Texture, I'm going to zoom in and see if adding some texture helps. It does not, because it's already kind of a soft photo. Clarity, let's see if the clarity helps. Not really, and it's not a hazy photo, so it doesn't really need any dehaze. So I'm going to say that's all I'm going to do for that for the moment. But I was mentioning before, Ian's car is green. I'm going to see if I can pull some of the green out a little bit. Oh yeah, here we go. I like to go to the mixer, and then when you're in the mixer, you can affect specific colors. So I can increase the saturation of the green, and you see the yard goes green. If I turn the saturation off, yard goes black and white. And I can go through and do this for every color and see how that works. Now, my goal here was to try and pull the green out of the car. In order to do that, I would need to just affect the car, because if I start messing with the green, it's also going to do the yard. So I would need to create a mask to do that. So I can hit W, I can hit subject. Oh, and now I'm going to create a new mask, and that works for me. So it's selecting the subject as the car plus everything else, and now I can affect just within this mask. And what did I say? I wanted to change the green, so it kind of moves things around a little bit. I can use the curve here and see if I can pull the green out of that car.
You can kind of see it in the window.
Yeah,
Right
it's not
hand
doing
side.
it's not doing what I wanted it to do.
Can you click just the car though? Because isn't it going to bring the green out of the little
Yes.
bag and like?
Yeah, well, that's fine for me. Anyways, I'll figure out how to do that in a bit, and then you can do lens correction, so removing the aberration and profile. So this was a DJI. You said, was this the Mini?
I believe it's the Mavic 3.
Okay.
So
These are
in a
all the
lot of
options they have.
situations, profile correction will probably be embedded into the RAW file on a camera like this. So you wouldn't need to use profile correction. But what you can do is you can see there is a little bit of distortion in there.
Yeah.
So you can go into manual and do it instead.
So that's how I would tackle a photo like this. And then at the end, one of the things you can do is you can before and after, and you can see what you've done, just like that.
So when you click the masking, when I was playing with the, or not with the masking, with the healing, maybe it was just a photo I was editing, but it didn't necessarily grab another piece of photo that looked similar to heal it. It just kind of like blurred it out really awkwardly.
Yeah.
So
there's a bunch of different ways that you can heal, and that's
okay.
one of the ways that you can heal.
Okay.
Ian, how's your Lightroom doing?
Good. I'm ready to go.
Okay, then I'll let you have the screen share and you can take a swing.
So this is a shot with a DJI Mavic 3 at about 10 o'clock at night of downtown Vancouver. This is facing facing north down the Granville Street Bridge is behind us. So this was shot in DNG. So when you shoot with the Mavic, you have two choices. You can either shoot in JPEG or in DNG or digital negative, which is a RAW file. This is the full resolution file coming out of the still camera. What it lets you do then is you've got quite a bit more latitude in your information or in the pixels. So last week or the week before we talked about video is normally broadcasters shared on YouTube in 8-bit color, which means there's 8 bits per pixel. When you shoot in RAW, it could be anywhere from 10 to 14 bits per pixel, which is billions of colors or billions of levels of exposure per pixel. So there's way more information than what you can see on screen available to the editor to color correct the image after the fact. So the first thing I'm going to do is, obviously this is a very a dark scene, right? So I'm going to hide my interface a little bit more. So hopefully you can see that. And let's see if I go full screen, I just want my exposure tools on the right, and I don't need anything else right now. We talked about the histogram. We talked about basic exposure and color correction a little bit here. And you can see everything on the right on this histogram panel is all the way to the left. Now, there's two ways we can edit this. You can actually edit inside the histogram just by grabbing components of the histogram and moving them around, or we can go down into the basic exposure information here. Now, when you're just starting out, Photoshop does an amazing job of doing things for you automatically. So if I really wanted to just find a good, decent average exposure value for this and just hope for the best, I'm going to hit the magic auto button. And the auto button is going to take a look at the exposure curve of the image and it's going to completely re-expose it based on what information is available. Now, it's also going to do it. First off, it's going to ignore white balance. So it's only looking at the exposure. And you can see we've gone from, and I can do a before and after real quick by clicking eye on or eye off here. And you can see the original is quite dark. And you can see how it's brought up all the shadows and it's brought up the midtones, but it hasn't really done anything to the highlights. So if I zoom in here on the sun being reflected off the building, and then we go back here, we can see the exposure slightly increases, but not dramatically. It's more focused on bringing up, because if you look at like the red on the Scotiabank building here, that would turn to just hard pink / white if it were to be pushed much further or to be overexposed. It's done a half decent job of bringing up the exposure, right? So just hitting automatic immediately makes a dramatic improvement in the image. Now, like I was saying before, I can go into the histogram and move these components around to increase or decrease my exposure in certain components. So you'll notice when I'm hovering over at the top right here, there's a block. So that's the midtones. And you can see what's been done. So if I look here, it's the whites are +7, the the highlights are minus 75, but it's +2 on exposure, and shadows are +43. And if you look down here, it correlates to what's on the tone adjustment curve, right? So the whites are at +7. So let me grab the midtones. Maybe I want to bring the overall exposure or the midtones up a little bit more. So I bring my mouse to the center and I move it to the right, and you can see how the midtones are increasing. And it's dragging the histogram over to the right. Now I start looking up over here on the left, top left corner. It's getting a little harsh. So I'm going to go back to the histogram and I'm going to grab the right and I'm going to bring it down a little bit and start pulling my highlights back. It's reducing contrast because now contrast is the difference between your blacks and your whites. So if I bring my blacks and whites closer together, it's going to reduce the overall contrast of the image. And the other way to see that in action is just do massive moves with the sliders. So if I go +30, you'll see how things get really harsh. If I go -30, everything gets really flat and the histogram gets really skinny. So a really wide histogram has a very high contrast look to it. If I go back to 0, you can kind of see how it's not too bad. So my highlights are under control, my shadows, everything. But one glaring problem, and you can see it in the histogram as well as in the image right now, when I look at the histogram, because Lightroom uses a 3-color histogram, my blues are really standing apart from everything else. And part of that is my color temperature is incorrect for the image. So again, there's 2 ways I can do this. I can look for a neutral gray surface in an image and use that as my white balance reference, or I can manually adjust the slider. So I'm going to use the picker tool here, and this is the white balance selector. And I'm going to go over to this building here because it looks to be neutral gray. Now remember, it's in shadow, and because it's in shadow, it is going to be bluer than reality. So my color is not going to be perfect, but it's going to be more appropriate. A better solution might be up here on the top of this building, which is less in shadow and more, but it's being influenced by the lights on the building as well. So I'm going to start with this shadow of the building, or even this roundel here. This might be better. And I'm looking for the whitest pixel I can find, and watch what happens to the image when I click on it. And you'll notice how the image now has changed the color temperature to 6750 Kelvin, and it's got 0 tint. So let's keep that in mind for a second, because the other option we have for changing color temperatures, we can go by time of day. So if you go into the WB or white balance drop-down menu here, you've got as it was shot. So this is how the camera shot it. I have automatic, and it figures out what it should be. Or I have daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, and custom. So based on the time of day. So if this was at noon, I'd probably want daylight, roughly 5500. Obviously everything's blue because the sun is falling below the horizon, and it's 9:45 at night. So then I would look at shade, and you notice how the shade has pushed it to 7500 Kelvin, which is closer to what automatic figured out as well. So color temperature increases as the day goes on. Tungsten is going to be a scene where it's lit by tungsten lights, which this is definitely not, which is why it's over blue to compensate for that orange light. Fluorescent is going to be similar, but it's going to have a different tint value to it because there's a bit of green in there. Flash is going to be closer to daylight because most flash strobes are calibrated to daylight, but you'll see it's still got a blue value to it. If you were standing there looking at this scene, in reality, it's probably going to be fairly close to daylight. Your eyes will feel like that, but we want to bring back just a little bit. So we bring it into shade, and because your eyes will adjust, and you've still got that warm tone. You can see the sun on the horizon reflecting there, and we've got more neutral grays in the color. So now the white balance is feeling a lot better to me. And I can go and look at that side by side. Of course, it's showing me everything. So color and exposure are starting to be where I'm happy. I might want to add a little more drama to this image, but one thing first now I want to do, I've got my general exposure, so I know the image is good. I'm going to take a quick peek in at pixel level and see, is the sharpness good enough, and what's the noise looking like? Because we've now increased this image from a dark image to a bright image. And one thing that happens when you do that is you're going to introduce all that noise we talked about, where the sensor technology, if you're pushing the sensor too hard, that noise is going to get created. And so we start looking at shadows and low scenes, or areas that you would know to be consistent. So like around the camera, around the cars here, you can see there's quite a bit of grain and noise. So there's some pretty cool technology built into Adobe Lightroom that can help us with that. Before I do this, I want to just fix one more thing in my composition. I've got a strong line of symmetry here. and I just want to make a minor tweak to it. So we're going to go back into the crop tool. So I brought up the rules of thirds line. And remember what I said, that this is a 4:3 photo. I can, in this case, because of the type of this image, I think I'm okay with leaving it as a 4:3. What I could do is go to a 4:5 aspect ratio, because then if this were a fine art print, for example, on a large wall print, 4:5 ratio would be reasonable. But what I want to do is I want to adjust this just slightly. So I'm going to center it, but then I'm going to go down into transform, and this is where I can start to get a little bit more creative with how I adjust this, because there's a bit of a rotation or a twist, so that the drone wasn't perfectly centered on the road. It was to the left a little bit, and so there's a bit of a twist to it. I can actually start messing with, nope, not aspect. Click on a number, you can always go 0, and what I want to do, I'm going to first just try auto, and you'll notice how it's tilting and twisting the image, and it's changed the projection of it. So now the buildings are more vertical. And I was going to talk about that in a second, but it's done it for me. And if I go horizontal, I can actually twist a little bit, but I think it's already done it enough that I don't need to do any further. But so we'll go back to off, and you can just go in first off and find horizon. And this is a common thing with drone shots, is if the gimbal is not perfectly level, it's really critical that you get the horizon level in your shot. If there is a horizon in your shot, it should be level. If it's not level, there needs to be a reason for it being level, because when you look at a shot, the horizon's not level. It's something like, it's called a Dutch angle, where the camera starts to have a tilt to it. Usually it's used in movies like The Shining or sci-fi movies, because then it's, well, things are off level for a reason, because things aren't going right. So it's important to look at straight lines should be straight and horizons should be level. So if the buildings here, if we go back into vertical, it's going to look at vertical lines, and you can see that's an extreme adjustment to it, but like all the buildings in the foreground now are vertical. But because we're using a wide angle lens, it's now created this really crazy aspect that we have to crop in order to compensate. So if I wanted to not let the viewer know how much this has been adjusted, this is kind of the shot I would need to use, and I'd still want to have some of the horizon. And so then if I hit enter, it's going to crop. Remember, we said it's non-destructive, so I can always go back. That's one way to do it. I don't really like that. So let's go back to off. Let's just see what auto does. And auto kind of chooses a slightly less extreme. So your foreground, because of lens distortion, you're going to have a little bit of forward tilt on the buildings that are at the most extreme, but everything's still feeling a little natural. And I can always go into my crop and see how much of my image I've lost. Because I've now used a less extreme adjustment, I can bring my image back in. And then another cool thing you can do is you can just hit constrain crop, and it will find the most of the image that you can use within the adjustments of the crop. So, but it's bringing my horizon down a little too much. But there's one reason I want this shot, is I actually want the stop line down here, because otherwise it feels like the image is cut off. So this is one of the limits of Lightroom versus Photoshop, is I could take this into Photoshop and actually take the same image, crop it, but then also have AI from Photoshop regenerate in the edges. So sometimes you don't necessarily want to just use Lightroom for editing, and you want to use that generative fill. So I'm going to turn off constrain crop, and I'm actually going to keep it there. And let's see what happens here. Okay. And we'll accept the edges are out a little bit right now, because we could drop this into Photoshop after the fact. So the other thing now we got to look at is there's quite a bit of noise in these images. Let's go into, we'll hide transform, and we'll go into detail. A couple things we can do is we can hold down Alt, and we can start looking at what is sharpening and what is unsharpening. So if you hold down Alt, it gives you a visual preview of what you're doing. But what I'm wanting this masking is, I don't want a ton of sharpening applied to this image. It doesn't need it. There's already enough in it. So by hitting mask, I'm reducing the amount of sharpening. So I'm not sharpening noise, because if I have this masking slider all the way over here, that's everything. And then if I bring it in, you can see it's sharpening all the noise as well. And I don't want that. It's just going to make the image more grainy than it needs to be. I just want really standout, high contrast items to have noise. So usually high 90s. And frankly, this image doesn't need a ton of sharpening. Needs at this point is a little bit of noise reduction. So here's the cool thing we're going to do. We're going to try using the AI denoising. So I'm going to click on it, and it's going to process the entire image, and you get a low res kind of preview of it, and you can kind of see what it's going to do to the noise here. And you can choose the amount that you want it to do, and it'll give you an idea of, so let's get down into the road, because that's kind of where things really get. And you can see, is it too muddy, or is it going to hold the image together? So I think this is a little too aggressive. So let's go 25 and see what that looks like. It's looking a little better. So I'm going to go enhance, and it's going to create a copy of the image, and it's going to process it. And you can see in the little corner here, it's running in the background, and my computer's getting loud. But so it's a fairly intensive process to do it. But what it's going to do is it's going to create a stack down here. So we're going to see the same image come up again, and now it's created the enhanced NRDNG. So now I've got, and if I go in here, and if I just click on the two of them, I can open the stack, and then I can go to the original and see, did that make it better or did that make it worse? Because the trade-off is going to be in detail. So like this clock here, so it hasn't really lost any detail, but it's certainly reduced the amount of grain. And this is one of the challenges with smaller sensor drones. So the Mavic 3 has a pretty big sensor, but even it's still relative to like the camera I'm on is an APS-C, and then or a full frame sensor is going to have way less noise than a drone camera that's smaller than like an Inspire. So noise is always going to be a challenge, and then it's all going to depend on what your end result is. If you're shooting this for a book or for a magazine, then getting the most detail possible out of it is probably something that's going to be a consideration. If it's going directly to Instagram or Facebook, then the resolution, noise, and everything is going to be not really a concern, because we're dealing with an image here that's roughly 20 megapixels. It's 5:4. This will look beautiful at full resolution, so it's not going to be as much of a concern. Now, real quick, I'm going to drop this into Photoshop and show you that generative fill. So I'm going to go right click on it. And this is why I say it's a good value for Lightroom. For $10 a month, you get both Lightroom and Photoshop. So I'm going to go right click, edit in Photoshop. It immediately creates a temporary file. And so we're still kind of lossless. We're getting into that generative, like iterative degradation steps now. Now I've got the DNG file in Photoshop with all my adjustments made to it. So I'm still working with as best a copy as I can. I'm not going copy of copy of copy of copy and starting to degrade the image. So I'm still working with that 20 megapixel photo. I've still got the original image in here, and I'm running this is the latest beta. So one thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to select this area, and if I select it, and then I go generative fill, and then just hit generate, it's going to compare the image surrounding to it using AI, and it will generate in that edge. And we'll see what it comes up with. And it's going to give us multiple variations of it. Filled it in, but it also created some buildings and some edges on that one. So then we've got another one here where it created a building, and or just extends the horizon and creates like a more natural. So that's a pretty good generation there. I'm going to keep that one for this layer. And again, it's non-destructive. So that layer is on the top of my original photo. So I can turn it on or turn it off. Okay, so I'm going to do the same over here. We'll draw a triangle around the area. I'm going to hit generative fill and just let it generate so there is a prompt there. So if I wanted to add in something, I could prompt it and it would use that prompt. But if I say nothing, it's just going to look at the image and generatively fill it. So it's similar to Photoshop's had this tech for a long time. They used to call it content aware fill. And you can see now, same thing. It's just taken the edge of the building and filled it in. So this is a pretty straightforward option for it. So now I've filled in the gaps on the edge of this image.
With the generative fill, you could do something like select the sky and say add an airplane to the sky, and it will generate exactly like an airplane in there.
So if I go object selection, quick selection tool, smart select. And I'm going to go generative fill, and I'm going to say add in black helicopter flying over. And your results will vary every single time. Okay, yeah, that's something. So you can see it changed the sky entirely and added what Photoshop thinks are helicopters. And Photoshop's AI model isn't like every different model. There's a whole bunch of different training out there. So OpenAI uses DALL-E, which seems to be more kind of cartoonish in some ways. But yeah, if we don't like any of this, we just turn it off. So now if I go save and close and save this back to the DNG file, and I can just minimize Photoshop. And now it's created a TIFF file, and a TIFF is a high resolution interchange file. It's still higher quality than JPEG. So I've got the edits embedded into the image. And if I didn't tell you, like, it wouldn't look too much different. Like, there's a bit of, you can see there's a little bit of degradation there in terms of the resolution, and there's obviously an absence of noise where it created it, but it did a pretty good job for something that's right at the hair's edge if I wanted to hold that aspect ratio and fill it in. So that's a really quick way to first off adjust the exposure, right? So if we go back to before and after, and I choose the original, yeah, and all your photos contain GPS information, so you can sort them. Although for some reason this map likes to start in England, but you can see the location of all the photos where they were captured that are in your library. Okay, Finn, you got another one?
Sure. Let me. Oh, I was already there. Let's look at a different photo. I was playing around with it in the background too. So let's take this photo. You can pretty clearly see what the issue with this photo kind of off the jump is, and that it's a little bit dark. If you see, there's these blue dots here. So this will tell me where it's 100% black, or I could also turn on 100% white. That's up here in the top. So I click this, and then you can see some of the blue. And if I crank up the exposure where it's red, that's where it's too bright. So blue dots 100% black, white or red dots 100% white. And you can kind of use this to, if you didn't want to, if I wanted to have nothing underexposed, I could crank it up, but then you can see that now it's blown out. So dark photo. So what do we do? Well, we could look at the highlights, see if that changes anything. It makes this, to me, that makes the sky a little bit too blue, so I'm going to not turn down the highlights that much, and then I can up the shadows. See, I'm upping the shadows a little bit. It might need just a scooch of exposure before I kind of fully up the shadows. So this is a long exposure. You can see the cars driving past here. That gives me an idea, but that's for a moment. Maybe a little bit, a scooch of clarity. And then I'm looking at the histogram and I'm noticing that this photo is quite blue. So I'm going to then go to the color mixer and I'm just gonna maybe scooch the blue down a little bit to make the sky look a little bit more natural. Like, this is fine, but you know, you've been to downtown. The sky downtown at night is blue, but it's not quite that blue. The mountain's not quite that blue either. So I'm gonna zoom in. I just like to go through the photo a little bit just to see. And then the blur here at the bottom kind of gave me an idea. So I'm going to right click on this photo. I'm going to click edit in Adobe Photoshop. And I am going to, I think that these cars are interesting. So I had an idea. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. I'm going to go filters, blur gallery, tilt shift. And let's see if a little bit of tilt shift makes this cool. It might not. Who knows? So I'm going to adjust my tilt shift so that it kind of is in line and see what that does. Let's see if that helps. Or does anything. You know, this idea worked better in my head.
Yeah, because now the top's
Because now the top is too blurry. So that's why we have Control Z. That didn't work.
I like those cars too.
I will not save this photo. That didn't work. It happens. It's fine. The bottom here is still a little bit dark. So I am going to mask. I'm going to mask the bottom here.
What's the subject here, though? Where's the subject of this photo? Is it that tall building? Is it the road?
It could be either the road or the tall building, but I am just going to mask the bottom here, and then I'm just going to scooch up the exposure just a little bit on the bottom. So now in this area, I've scooched the exposure. I might actually bring it all the way to the end of the trusses here, and then see in here, it's going to bring up the exposure. Ideally, you'd want to spend a lot of time with the mask to mask it off perfectly, because as you can see, like if I pump it all the way up, it doesn't, around the edges, it doesn't look great. But, you know, we have a saying in showbiz that's, it looks good from afar, but it's far from good. That'll do for the moment. And then you can export it with settings and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so why don't I walk through the export module real quick here. So I'll just drop back in. So
this photo with the road, this would be a good one for tilt shift.
Yeah, you could potentially do that as well with it.
The other word for tilt shift you might have heard is the miniature effect, where you make everything look like toys.
So when you go to export photos from Lightroom, like I said, we're still working with combining the recipe at this point. So we've got this TIFF file, right? If I wanted to send this to Facebook or to the web or Instagram or anything else, I'd probably want a JPEG or a PNG or a WebP. So the first thing I'm going to do is export this. The export module has quite a bit to it. And And there are presets and templates and other things that you can use. So you can set up like, I'm always going to export it in a certain resolution, a certain file format or whatever, and I can build a preset for it. I could export directly to email, CD, or DVD if people still use those. There's a reason the software is still called Classic, or I have another piece of software for doing time lapses. But so hard drive, and then I can choose, well, where do I want it to go? In this case, I'm just going to go right to the desktop. What am I going to do? And ask what to do for files so you don't accidentally overwrite stuff. You can adjust the naming. So if you're uploading, like my wife does weddings, so if there's 1,000 photos, we don't really want it to say Canon whatever. We'll say SL photo dash whatever the number is in sequence, so that they know what the photo is that they're talking about. So you can rename it. You can choose what metadata. I'm going to make this bigger. If it were a video, which you can do basic video editing in Lightroom as well, or at least basic color adjustment. It's not really the best tool for it anymore. I certainly don't recommend it over DaVinci Resolve, which is free, and this isn't. We get into file settings. So I've got JPEG, XLarge JPEGs, AVIF, which is a new photo interchange format that's not fully supported by everyone yet, but it is definitely a bleeding edge option. PSD is Photoshop file. TIFF is Target Interchange file format. Is an older technology, almost uncompressed, so it's very, very large file. PNG is portable network graphics. DNG is a RAW file, so if you wanted to keep it in a RAW format, that's the only way you can, or is the original. Most commonly, you're going to send someone a JPEG, especially if it's for like a website. So your quality, and it's the same for real estate photos as well. Quality is going to be important. You don't necessarily want to send 100%. Especially if it's going to a website. Anywhere from 70% and up is going to look almost the same to the end user, especially at a screen resolution. Color space, not too much of an importance these days, but sRGB is the color space of the internet. So that is the standard color format that you'd want to be in, and it should be by default. It now supports HDR output, but most devices don't support HDR yet, so it's still something that I wouldn't recommend using unless you have a specific use case. What you do want to do though is, this is a 5,000 by 4,000 pixel photo, so it's a little big. So we're going to want to resize it, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can put it into a box and say specifically I want it to be in that 1,000 pixel box. Or the better way to do it is to go by either the long edge, the short edge, or the total megapixels. The best I usually do is say go by long edge, and I'll say I don't want the longest edge of this image. Now in this one it's more or less square, but if it were a wide aspect or a long portrait shot, 2048 is a good number for the longest edge of the pixel, which means that you're going to end up with a roughly 2 to 3 megapixel photo, which is plenty for the internet. Most websites will actually automatically resize photos that are bigger than 2000 pixels back down to 2000 or less. The other thing that you have an option to adjust is your pixels per inch, or your resolution. This isn't going to matter for web. It's only going to matter if you're using print dimensions. So pixels per inch, your average printer is 600. Your average computer monitor is 150. If you change this number, it will not affect your pixel resolution. It will only affect it if I were working in inches. So if I wanted an 8x10 photo and I wanted it to be 10 inches long at the longest, and I said I wanted it to be 600 pixels per inch, well, now it's going to be 6,000 pixels long. If I leave it in pixels, you see how it's gone to 6,000, and say 2048, and I set this to 150, and then I go back to inches, it's going to be 13 inches. So a 2048 pixel image is going to be enough pixels to print a 13-inch long image at like 13 by 10. So it's enough information to print at a small size. It's enough information for a pretty big computer monitor. So you'd be happy with that. I wouldn't do any additional sharpening if I've already got it the way I want it to be in the picture. But if you were just batch exporting a bunch of photos, which you can do, then that's where you would start using the sharpen module in here. And you could say whether it's for screen, matte paper, or gloss paper, and then how much. And then metadata, which is important. If you want to remove location info, so if you've taken a picture and you don't necessarily want the end user to know where the picture was taken, you can remove the GPS coordinates from it. You can embed your copyright information. You can embed all the camera information. You can do everything, or you can do just copyright and contact info only. So then that's something that if you're sending your images to your end user, You maintain like who the original shooter or the camera was and the contact info, which you can embed into the metadata in the library module. There's a ton of power there. And then if you need to watermark it, you can slap a watermark on the image here as well. And you can edit your watermarks in this template. So I can have copyright Ian Wills. I can put my logo in here. I can have a whole bunch of templates of what I want in there. And then afterwards, I can have these automatically open in Photoshop. I can open them into another application, or I can launch a script. So there's a bunch of powerful tools here as well for if you're managing thousands of photos and you've got this massive export that you need to do, you're going to have a few more. But in this case, I'm just going to hit export and I'm going to say after show it in Explorer. So it pops up on my screen here. I hit export. It's going to render the JPEG. Boom, there it is. Now I've got that final photo. And if I go to properties, I can see it's only 900 kilobytes. So it's nice and small, easy for me to send. But if I open it in preview, it's going to go on my other screen. I'll bring it back over. There's a, so at 100%, so I'm at 79% here. I'll go to 100%, right? My screen is roughly 2,500 pixels wide. This is a 2,000 pixel wide image. So it's still perfectly fine. And if I zoom in, I'm not losing detail that badly, right? For a web-based image, this is going to be perfectly fine, right? So that is the
one of the other things you can do when if you bring back your File Explorer for a second.
Sure.
One of the things you can do in the properties is you right-click and click properties, and that's where you can actually view some of the metadata in the details section.
Yeah, so you can see the pixel size, the dots, color space, and of course I've stripped out all the metadata here. So this was 0295. If I go into 0295 here and go to properties, you can see the metadata, what kind of camera it was shot with, what the resolution information, exposure values, also lat and long and relative altitude are in there as well. So it's depending on what you're doing. Like if you're doing asset documentation for a customer, they may not want the GPS information or they might specifically request it. So this information is stored for every photo. It's just whether or not you will see it. So I think that's probably it for this week because we basically wanted to keep this under time and we're focusing on kind of a taste of what you can do with Adobe Lightroom in terms of practical editing. So if you guys have any questions, now would be a great time. We can chat about them. So what I'm going to do is the photos that we've edited today, I'm going to dump a couple of the raw photos into the discussion underneath this live room once it's finished recording. And then you're welcome to mess with those and kind of experiment. So Adobe Lightroom is free for a 30-day trial. It's worth trying out. I think it's definitely worth giving it a shot and seeing if it works for you. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and see if we can find a couple more free options. And then we're going to record a tutorial using Lightroom on the iPhone as well as a separate to this, because there are some free features in Lightroom that you can use on the iPhone side of it. So if you transfer photos from your drone to your phone, you can process them, but it's a little bit more limited. So we'll just do that as more of a recording than as a live session here today. So next week, I think we'll get into a bit more of fundamentals of editing. I did start recording kind of like a shot selection process the other day when I was doing something, but then of course I screen recording going properly, so that was frustrating. So I get to redo it again with you guys all live, but we'll pre-record something for that because it's a pretty big in-depth topic, and then we'll work together through it live. So we'll do some video editing fundamentals next week. Now that we've talked about camera shots and motion a little bit, and everything we're doing, like this is building on that as well, because we've talked about exposure, which you have to do in video as well. But ideally, when you're shooting video, you really want to have that be nailed in camera first before you get it into the edit, because you have less latitude and less flexibility when it comes to video, unless you spend like $10,000 on a camera that can shoot RAW, which none of us have here. So we'll work with what we got. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this week, and we'll hope to see you next week live here on Coastal's weekly live.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Finn.
See you guys. Thank you.
Take care.